I don't know about you, but I love the flavors of the Mediterranean region. Dishes brimming with garlic, tomatoes, basil, olive oil, and more just seem to have universal appeal. Today I've put together a really fun menu of some of my favorites that are packed with all kinds of delicious fresh flavor. Everybody loves pizza, right? But what about reimagining pizza in a different form? I'm excited to share with you one of my favorite new recipes, and that's for pizza meatballs. We're going to start by making some meatballs. I'm using ground beef today, but you can use ground chicken or turkey, even ground pork if you prefer. We're going to add in just a few things for flavor. We've got some minced onion, a little bit of Worcester sauce, or Worcestershire if you want to try and pronounce it using all the letters on the label. Some oregano, a real Mediterranean favorite, a little bit of garlic powder, and last but not least, one of my personal favorites, Dijon mustard for a nice little kick. So we're just going to mix that up, and really there's no way to make meatballs other than with your hands. They do sell little meatball makers, but what's the point? Just dig in there and get your hands dirty. And the last thing we're going to add is some beaten egg, and that's just to help it bind together. Some meatball recipes call for breadcrumbs and different things, but I like to keep them sort of on the simple side. Give that one more little stir, and then I will shape the meatballs. We're going to bake this in a cast iron frying pan because that will trap all the deliciousness and make it easy to layer on the pizza toppings after the meatballs are partially cooked. Like I said, it's a little sloppy, but it's the only way. And these are pretty free form. You don't have to make them any particular size, just make them the same size as each other so they'll bake evenly. One good tip with meatballs is not to pack them too tightly. It makes them tougher that way. And just make as many as you need to fill your pan. You could make little individual ones if you have small cast iron pans, or a big one for sharing. The pan's almost full. You don't want to crowd them too much because they need space to cook. They will shrink down as you cook them, and that'll just leave more room for the delicious pizza toppings. Maybe we'll sneak one more in there. You can also use pre-made store-bought meatballs, and they are fully cooked, so you can speed things up in this process by just putting the meatballs right in the pan and proceeding. Okay, give my hands a little wipe. And now we're going to put this dish in a 400-degree oven and let the meatballs pre-cook for about 10 minutes. All right, we've pre-cooked our meatballs, and as I mentioned, they have shrunk down a little bit, but they're just perfect. And now we're just going to sprinkle our pizza toppings on. You can use whatever you like. My family kind of keeps it simple, and you probably don't need extra meat because it is meatballs, but if you really want pepperoni, go ahead. So we've got some onions. Just scatter them around loosely. And then green pepper, olives would be great as well if you like that. And one of my favorite toppings, mushrooms. And again, it looks like it's kind of a hot mess, and that's exactly what it's going to be in a great way. So now we're going to put the pan back in the oven. You want to pre-cook the vegetables a little bit so that they'll soften as they do on top of a pizza. So back into the oven we go for a few more minutes. All right, our veggies are nicely softened now, and it's time to add the sauce and cheese. You can use any pizza sauce you want. I happen to just really like this one from Farm Boy. It's got great flavor. Drizzle it all over. You want to make sure it's well covered, but not drowning in sauce. Kind of like a typical pizza. And last but not least, lots of mozzarella cheese. This ends up being kind of like one of those famous 7-layer dips where you just need to scoop down through all the layers to get a taste of all the pizza goodness. And one more spoonful for good luck. There we go. And now it's back in the oven just until the pizza sauce is bubbling and the cheese is melted. All right, now we have our finished pizza meatball casserole. You can see the cheese is melted, the sauce is bubbling, and it's just waiting for you to dive in. I like to scoop it up with wedges of pita bread. You could also use tortilla chips, a spoon, maybe even your fingers.
Now that they're available year-round in most grocery stores, I love using fresh oranges in lots of different ways. Coming up, I'm going to show you how well they go with thinly shaved fennel and arugula. If you enjoy Mediterranean-style dishes, I highly recommend treating yourself to a bottle of good olive oil for use in salads and for finishing dishes. It's worth it.
It's a great idea to modify some tasks in the kitchen when you're working with kids. Chopping nuts is a great example. Ditch the knife, put them in a Ziploc bag, and use a rolling pin instead. Safer, and they won't be flying all over the counter either. I'm excited to share with you this delicious Mediterranean-inspired salad. It features one of my favorite vegetables, fennel, along with oranges and either mixed baby greens or arugula, whatever you prefer. And of course, crunchy pistachios for the topping. So to start, I'm going to finish by chopping or crushing my pistachios. Really, really quick with the rolling pin. One more little roll here. There we go. And I'm just going to put those in a bowl so it'll be easy to scatter them on top when we go to assemble the salad. All right, next up we're going to tackle our fennel. And this is a really nice size bulb. It's not too big. Sometimes they're bigger and you'll need to remove any discoloration on the outside, but this one's in really good shape. So we just take the tops off. You can save those for stew or soup if you want an extra bit of flavoring. And we'll cut the bottom off as well. And the idea here is to try and slice it as thinly as you can. It can be a bit of an unfamiliar flavor for people, but it's really, really delicious. It's got a bit of a licoricey sort of taste to it. So we're cutting this really thinly. If you're comfortable using a mandolin, that would be a great way to slice it thinly also. And I would plan on about 1/4 of a bulb of this size per person. This is the kind of salad that would go really nicely with a fish dish, even with grilled meats. It's just a bit more elegant than your typical tossed green salad. I often like to serve a plated or composed salad as the first course at a sit-down meal, and it's great because you can get them partially assembled ahead of time and then just finish them up before you put them on the table. For the amount of greens we have set out, I think that's probably just about enough fennel. So we're going to take that and we're going to scatter it on top of our greens. As I said, you can use arugula, which has a nice peppery flavor, or just any mixed greens. Even spinach would be nice. All right. Next up, we're going to prepare a very simple vinaigrette. In this case, we're going to use red wine vinegar, which is also a very typical Mediterranean flavor. A little bit of salt. And you want to add the salt, as I've mentioned in previous episodes, before you add the oil because it won't dissolve once the oil is in there. And of course, some fresh ground pepper. Just going to give that a little stir to dissolve the salt. And now we're going to add in some extra virgin olive oil, one of the quintessential Mediterranean ingredients. Put the lid on and give it a shake. In this case, we're not adding in any Dijon because I want this to have a milder flavor than some of the other vinaigrettes. You can see how nicely it blends up with a little bit of a shake. So we'll set that aside. And now we're going to prepare the oranges. So I'm going to switch to a board that has a trough around the edge because that will help contain the juice that comes out. So it's really easy to cut up the oranges. You just slice off both ends. And then you can go down from top to bottom to get all of the peel and the pith off. So you can see how nicely that comes off. When you're shopping for oranges in the store, it's a really good idea to give them a good squeeze. If they feel like they have a really thick skin, there's a chance they might not be as juicy. Or they'll also be more of a nuisance to peel. And you can go back on a second pass if you leave some of the pith behind. The pith is the white part here. It can be a little bit bitter tasting, so it's a good idea to try and get it all off. Any variety of seedless orange will do. These are just classic navel oranges. There's a newer to us in North America variety called Cara Cara that's really sweet and delicious, and it's got a darker, almost orangey red color that's really, really pretty in a salad. So I'm just going to go back on these few spots here and get the pith off. Yeah, that's looking pretty good. And now we're going to cut it into quarters and slice it up. And you should probably plan on about 1/3 to 1/2 an orange per person, depending on the size of your oranges. All right, those are all set. So now we're going to dress the salad before we plate it. So give the dressing another little shake. In a lot of restaurants, you'll find that they're making such big quantities of salad, they actually just roll up their sleeves and dive right in when it comes to mixing them. And that's to ensure that everything gets nicely coated. Another way to do that at home is just to use a pair of tongs if you don't want to get your hands right in there. And this is better than putting the dressing on once it's already on the plate, because that's when you end up with puddles that don't look very attractive. This makes for a better eating experience too, because everything is uniformly coated in dressing. All right, I'm happy with that. So now we're going to put it on our plate. And again, the tongs are useful for that task. And you want to avoid trying to pour it onto the plate, because then you'll end up with too much dressing. You can see there's a little bit here in the bottom of our bowl. We want to leave that behind. Okay, that's looking great. And now we'll arrange our oranges on top. You can fan them out, or you can just drop them, scatter them, whatever you like. They're just a nice bright counterpoint of color and flavor with the fennel and the greens. There we go. And last but not least, our nicely crushed pistachios. And now our composed salad plate is ready to serve.
The classic combination of chickpeas, tomatoes, and spinach is usually seasoned with Indian influences like ginger, garam masala, turmeric, and cumin. But I decided to try a new twist. As it turns out, the traditional Greek elements of oregano, mint, lemon, and feta are the perfect thing to make chickpeas sing. This hearty stew takes just minutes to prepare and will warm you on even the dampest and coldest of days.
The classic combination of onions, tomatoes, and chickpeas along with spinach is often used in Indian food, but today I'm going to reimagine it with the Mediterranean flavor profile. It's a delicious quick stew that's wonderful for lunches, a quick weeknight dinner, and it's really packable as well. Start with just a little bit of oil in our saucepan, olive oil of course, and we're going to add some chopped onion. I often get asked what kind of onions I use. It depends on the dish. In this case, regular yellow cooking onions are just perfect because they're going to have a chance to cook down and have their flavor soften a little bit. There we go. That's sizzling away. Now we're going to add a little bit of minced garlic. I buy a lot of local garlic in sort of August and September each year, and then store it in mesh bags in my cold cellar so I can have a winter's supply without having to buy foreign grown garlic during those other months. Okay. Just keep an eye on it while the garlic's in there. You don't want it to burn, and the best way to prevent that is to keep it moving. I can smell the garlic now. It's really aromatic. It's great. Next up, we're going to add some diced tomatoes. These are Roma or plum tomatoes, and they're really nice to cook with because they don't have too many seeds. You can use canned tomatoes as well, and it'll be just as delicious. So again, we're just keeping it moving. You can see how quick and easy this is to prepare, especially if you've organized your ingredients ahead of time, as I have here. The tomatoes are already starting to soften. Now I'm going to add a can of chickpeas, and these have been drained and rinsed. I usually try and buy the low sodium kind whenever I can find them. You can also cook up chickpeas from dry. They need to be soaked ahead of time. That's a great use for an Instant Pot or pressure cooker. So we'll pour these in. Chickpeas are a great protein source, so this is a good dish if you've got vegetarians or vegans that you're trying to feed. Now for those Mediterranean flavors, as I mentioned, we'll add in some oregano and a pinch of hot pepper flakes. I really like things with a little bit of spice. You can adjust to your personal or your family's preferences. And last but not least, a little bit of water. And then we're just going to let it cook for a few minutes so that the tomatoes soften up a little bit more. We'll turn it up. You can cover the pot if you like. Okay, let's take a look at how it's doing. Oh, it's bubbling away beautifully. We'll give it a little stir. You can see the onions are softening along with the tomatoes. Because the chickpeas are cooked, if you're using canned ones or pre-cooked homemade ones, you don't need too long on this. I'm just checking the tomatoes, and some of them are getting nice and mushy, which is perfect. I'm going to add a little salt and pepper at this point. And depending on the consistency of how you like your soups or stews, you can certainly feel free to add more water if you wish. So I'm just going to turn that down to let it simmer for a couple more minutes. And we'll get our toppings for the stew ready, because that's, of course, what makes it really special. We're going to add in the spinach just before we serve it. It just needs to be in long enough to wilt it. If your spinach leaves are large, these are quite small, there's no need to chop them up, but if they're large, you'll definitely want to give them a couple of swipes with the knife. And fresh mint is another great addition to this dish. It's a bit unexpected. People often think parsley when you're working with a tomato, onion, garlic combination. So mint's kind of a fun surprise, and if people don't look too closely, they're just going to see green and assume parsley. If you're worried about buying fresh herbs for dishes and you don't want the rest to go to waste, you can chop them up and mix them in with oil or water and freeze them in little Ziploc bags. And that's a great way to have them ready, maybe not as a garnish because they'll lose a bit of their color, but you could certainly add them in to a dish while it's cooking for that fresh herb flavor. Okay, that's probably about enough for this bowl. And we're also going to put some fresh lemon juice on the top when we serve it. I love using fresh lemon for a really big hit of flavor. It's one of the first things that hits your palate, and it can compensate for less salt. People just want a big, bold flavor. And if you use lemon or lime, you're going to get that without the need for extra salt. It's always a good idea to squeeze the lemon right before you're going to use it. It can actually start to get a bit more bitter the longer that it sits. All right, let's check our stew again. Oh, it looks great. Now we're going to put the spinach in here. We'll just do that by hand, just dropping it in. Kind of scattered around. All the little bits in there. This is a great use for spinach that's maybe not 100% perfect. If it's a day or so past its prime, you don't want it if it's yellow or brown or kind of getting slimy, as spinach can do. But if it's a little bit past its best, like I said, it's a perfect dish for that. So we'll put the lid back on for 1 more minute to wilt that spinach. We're going to get our serving bowl ready. I really like to use something that's a little bit taller because it helps to keep the soup or stew warm for longer while you eat it. And we've also got some crumbled feta cheese here for our topping. I love feta for its briny, salty flavor. And again, that makes up for the lack of salt in our stew. We just put in those few little grinds. And I really like serving a dish like this with some crusty bread cut up. You can have butter or not, that's up to you. Now let's check on our spinach. It's looking good. There, I think it's ready to serve. The spinach is wilted, that's perfect. Turn off the stove. Get a ladle here. And as you serve it, just make sure you get the nice delicious liquid from the bottom as well as all the different vegetables. And it's nice if you can get some spinach near the top so people get that contrasting color. Now we're going to drizzle just a bit of the lemon juice on top. As we said, we want that to be one of the first flavors that hits the palate. And a generous sprinkling of feta. If you don't prefer feta, you could use goat cheese or chèvre instead. You could even use grated mozzarella. It's really whatever you prefer. And last but not least, we've got our fresh mint. And now our beautiful Mediterranean tomato and chickpea stew is ready to be enjoyed. I think it's safe to say that these dishes could easily become as big a hits in your house as they have been in mine. This meatball pizza casserole appetizer or main dish is an absolute favorite. It'd be great for football or hockey game watching, or even as a post outdoor activity snack. I really love this fennel salad. It's so packed with flavor, and look how nutritious it looks as well. And last but not least, this Mediterranean-inspired chickpea, tomato, and spinach stew is as delicious as it is nutritious. I hope you can welcome the flavors of the Mediterranean into your kitchen in a whole new way.